In this exercise, we'll construct the XMRBarChart, or sometimes called the XMRBarChart. It is a chart used to track variation process level. That's what the I does, track the variation in the process. And then the moving range, the MR bar, tracks the variation between the measurements that we've taken within the process. A couple of assumptions when using this type of chart. First of all, one sample is collected from each period. So you can see we have weeks here. That's the period, and we've taken one sample from an airport, the number of landings per week for each period. It cannot vary. It has to be limited to one sample per period. And that the data that is collected when it is analyzed, it's analyzed consecutively from the first occurrence to the last occurrence. So we have these sorted by the week in which they occurred. So we meet the assumptions of this test. I have provided a workbook for you in Moodle that's laid out like this. If you don't have that workbook, you will need to pause the video and take a moment and set your worksheet up. Put these headings in, and these headings, these values. Don't worry about the subscripts, just put them in. I put in the subscripts so that students get a better understanding of what we're doing. The same here, you'll need to put these values in. Again, don't worry about the subscripts. They're just useful to help connect with the factors table and other values on the workbook. And also, don't worry about these equations. I put them in so that the students can relate what they're doing back to the equations in the textbook or in the PowerPoints that I provided for the course. So if you don't have this, you want to pause the video now and set your workbook up. All right, the first thing we need to do is identify the N for our sample. And the N for our sample in this case is 7. You can see we have 7 weeks here. So I'll enter 7 there. Now we need to calculate the average for X, which is the number of landings. But traditionally we would add these up. And you can see we add them all up and we divide them by N, which would be 7. So you could take the sum of this and put it over N, which is 7. I'm just going to take the average function in Excel and find the average. All right. Next, I need to find R bar, and in order to do that, I need to find what R is for each iteration. And I have the formula for R for each period at the top. The formula is the R from the period equals the absolute value of the X from the period less the X from the previous period. Now this X from the previous period means that we're going to lose one of our samples. We're going to have an N equal to 6. You can see in the equation down here that we divide it by N minus 1. So it would be 7 minus 1, which is 6. Because we won't have an R for week 1 because we don't have a landing from a previous period to subtract from the landing for the current period. So we have to move down and start here. So we'll go ahead and take the absolute value of the current period's landings less the previous period's landings. And if we leave those cell references relative, we can just copy those down. And I want to keep my little underline at the bottom, so I'll fill without formatting. That way I keep the underline here. Now I can go ahead and take my average, and I can, again, take the sum of these values and put them over N minus 1. But I'm just going to use the average function in Excel and start in week 2. Take those values and get my average. Now I need to determine the N for my factors. In my equation, I use values from my factor table. I need a value for capital E sub 2, lowercase d sub 2, and capital D sub 4, and capital D sub 3 in order to find my upper control limits and lower control limits for X and R. And in order to use this table, here's the factors table that I've provided for you. You can see that we have all of our factors across here. But to decide which one to use, we need to know what our n is. And once we have determined what our n is, we go to the factor for that level of n and take it and use it in our workbook. In this type of control chart, we determine n for our factors by looking at how many values we used to determine r. In our example, we used 2 values to calculate r. We used the current period and the previous period. Because we used 2 values, then our n for our factors equals 2. So I will go and get E sub 2 with an n of 2. Here's my n of 2. Go across here and find capital E sub 2. There it is. I have lowercase d sub 2 for an n of 2, so I'll say equals, go to my factors, n of 2, lowercase d sub 2, there it is. I have an uppercase d sub 3 equals, I'll go to my factors table, n of 2, uppercase d sub 3, here it is. And then uppercase d sub 4 equals, go to my factors, n of 2, uppercase d sub 4, there it is, enter. All right, now I'm ready to solve for my upper control and lower control limits for x. Here we have the formula, and the order of operations makes it such that we can just enter the variables as indicated. We don't need to use any parentheses. We can get x bar, which is here, and add that to E sub 2, uppercase E sub 2 times r bar over lowercase d sub 2. We get our upper control limit for x. Now our lower control limit for x is the same, except we subtract x bar from it. So we'll take x bar minus E sub 2, uppercase E sub 2 times r bar over lowercase d sub 2. And we get our lower control limit. The upper control limit for the range is d sub 4 times r bar. So we'll go and get d sub 4 and multiply that times r bar. And our lower control limit for the range is d sub 3 times r bar. So we'll get that. All right. Now we have all of our values. We're ready to begin to construct our control chart for x. We'll need the upper control limit and the lower control limit for x, as well as the average of x, or x bar, the control limit x. And we'll go ahead and populate this table while we're doing it. We'll get the upper control limit for r, the lower control limit for r, and then the average, or r bar, the control limit r. We'll use these tables to construct our 2 charts. Now, the upper control limit for x for each week is going to be the same. We're just creating these tables so that Excel will draw the chart for us. So our upper control limit for x is our upper control limit for x here. I'm going to make that absolute because I want to just copy it down. I want to copy it so that there's one for each week. Lower control limit for x the same way. Here's the lower control limit for x. I'll press F4 and make that absolute. copy that down. The control limit for X is just X bar, so I'll go and get X bar. Press the F4 function key to make that absolute. There we go, and I'll copy that down. Now, when we combine these with the actual values of X, we'll be able to draw our control chart. Let's go ahead and put together the chart table for R, the range. We'll get the upper control limit for R, which is here. Press the F4 function key to make that absolute. Press enter, and we'll just copy that down. The lower control limit for R equals the lower control limit for R. Press the F4 function key to make that absolute. And I'll just copy that down. And then the control limit for R, or R bar, equals R bar. And we will press the F4 function key to make that absolute. And then we'll copy that down. Now we have all the values that we need to make our control charts. So let's start by making the X chart. I'm going to place my cursor out here where there are no values around it. I don't want Excel to try to use the chart wizard and make some nonsensical chart. I'm going to insert tab. I'll go over here. I want a line chart. I'm just going to use the first one. It doesn't matter. Bring it down here, kind of create a workspace for it. Now I'm going to select the data that I want in it. So I'm on the chart tools up here. I'm on the design tab. The chart tools, the design and format tab come up when I select the chart. If I move off the chart, you can see they go away. When I click on the chart, they return. I'm going to go on the design tab to the select data option. And it will allow me to select data for my chart. I'm going to add some data. I'm going to start by adding the upper control limit. I'm going to use the heading for this, the upper control limit for X as the series name. And you can use the tab key to tab to the next cell, or you can go down and just select the next cell, but you need to get that one out of there. So I'll just type in equals. Excel has to put a 1 in there in order not to create an error. But we'll take that out, and now put my range of values for the upper control limit of X, and you can see it just draws a line across all 7 weeks or 7 periods. Say OK. Now I'll add another one, and I'm going to add the lower control limit, and I'll press the tab key, type equals, then I'll select my range for the lower control limit, and it just draws the line. Okay. I'm going to add another one. I'm going to this time add the X bar, the control limit X. Press the tab key equals, and then I'll get those values. Draws my line. Then I'm going to add finally the actual series. So I'll select the landings as my heading. Press the tab key equals, and then I'll select the actual landings. Say OK, and you can see I've got my control chart. Now, in this case, we have weeks 1 through 7 as the x-axis labels, and Excel just numbers them 1 through 7 because there are 7 of them. So in this case, it works out. But many times, you would want to edit that and put in the actual axis labels, and they're the same, no change, but that's how you would do that. Okay. Now let's put in just a couple of things. Let's put a title on our chart above the chart, and we'll place our cursor in here and call this the I or X chart. And let's put a legend in our chart, and we'll just put it off to the right so we can see. There we have our control chart for X. Now let's create our range control chart. I'll just move that off to the side. Place the cursor here, insert, go to my line charts, insert a new line chart, move it down here where I can work with it. Go ahead then and go again up to my design tab on the chart tools and select data. I'm going to go ahead and go through the same process only for the range value. I'll add. I'm going to add my upper control limit. Now, if you remember, we don't have a period 1 here. I'd put it in, you could have left that out. We don't have a week 1. So I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to start at week 2 here. When I create this chart, there isn't a week 1. So I'll go ahead and do that. It shows 1 through 6. All right, say OK. Then again, I'll add my lower control limit, tab equals, and then again, I'll start in week 2. That's where that starts. And then I'll add my control limit, or R bar, and again, I'll begin here. Okay. So I'll go ahead and add, and for the series name, you know, I can put R bar in here, and then equals. I'll select these 6 values, indicate OK. I may want to edit this and show that this is 2 through 7, however you want to do it. That at least indicates, shows how that changes the labels on the x-axis. I'll say OK to this, and then I'll go ahead and go up here, add a chart element. I'll add a chart title above, and we'll call this the XMRBarChart. And then I'll go ahead and put in a legend, put it off to the right, and you can see I have each of my lines labeled. That's how you create the X and MR bar charts when you have a series of data where one sample per period was taken and the data is presented in the order in which the samples were collected.